welcome. Thanks for coming. Hi. I'm Jennifer Spiegler. I am the Senior Vice President for Strategic Partnerships at Kognito. And today we're going to be talking about supporting social emotional learning, exploring the role of virtual human simulations, which has a lot of cognitive dissonance in the title, so we'll work through that as we go. Ron Goldman is my colleague and my partner in crime and the CEO of Kognito. And, you know, we've been hearing a lot about social emotional learning if you're in the K12 space over the last 3 or 4 since the changeover of the Every Student Succeeds Act, and really social emotional learning coming sort of back into the center of the conversation around learning. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. But since we're such a tiny group, I wonder if everybody could go around and introduce themselves. Is that okay? Want to start here?
Roderick Data. I'm a stream teacher in Solana Beach for K-6.
Nice.
Maureen McMahon, I'm the Deputy Superintendent for Strategic Initiatives, Academics, and Annual Accounting Learning.
I'm Kirsten Bronford. I'm a student at the University of Pennsylvania Education Entrepreneurship Program, and I'm also an administrator at Strategic.
Do you work with Jenny Zapp?
Yes.
Okay. Sarah?
Hello, I'm Sarah Long. I'm the Director of Strategy at SEL Learning.
Okay. My name is Matthew Farrig. I'm a training and curriculum specialist at Youth Entrepreneurs, a nonprofit that works in the high school space.
Okay.
I'm Queso Diallo. I'm the Director of Special Education at Ednovate Charter Schools in LA. And I'm from Bowie, Maryland, which is very close here.
Well, thank you all for taking time to be with us. This is supposed to be a 90-minute session. We may not need 90 minutes, but we might have fun and do a lot of things. It's going to be really, really interactive. We're not going to stand up here and lecture to you because it's a workshop. And that would sort of defeat the purpose of workshopping. Next slide, please. Do I need a clicker?
I have.
Oh, you have the clicker. Oh,
that's why I'm here, to control the slides.
Okay. Well, you do this slide. This is your slide.
Okay. So this is just quickly about us. We're a health simulation company based in New York City. Do a lot of work in K12, specifically around mental health and SEL, all through simulations where you can actually practice the skills that we want you to build by talking with the virtual humans that will, in most cases, portray students. So you'll have a scenario. We'll run through a few of those today so you can actually play through those and see how it feels. But the basic idea of learning through practice and through feedback, specifically skills that are not easy to learn, communication, interpersonal, social skills. You don't learn them from a lecture. You really have to try, fail, succeed, learn through that process. So we've done a lot of work in K-12. Jennifer is really leading the way in the K-12 area, but we've also done work in higher ed, in healthcare, all around really the communication and the conversation element of it. And we have a number of simulations that have been recognized as evidence-based through the collection of data to look that we really are able to change behavior. So we don't measure success by completion rate. Not that it's not important, but that's not really the way to evaluate it. And if we have time, we can get to that today. The area in K-12, as I mentioned, that we deal with, which are all really touching on SEL. I think the more I hear about it, it's really everything that's not academic skill is a little bit of a SEL, right? Whatever way we communicate with each other, the way we talk. And it's not just about giving those skills to the kids, but it's also for you as the teacher, as the educator, to be able to better connect with those individuals. So we have done work, as I said, mental health, vulnerable populations, which around LGBTQ and others, a lot of work around trauma and bullying prevention, and even on the healthcare side around substance abuse, if it relates to opioids or mental health in the primary care setting. So really touching on a lot of those. Our expertise is in the learning design, simulation technology, the ability to craft these conversations, but we always partner with subject matter experts on each one of those topics and do a lot of beta testing with teachers and and others as we build those. Happy to talk more about our process of development if it's of interest. As I mentioned, a lot of work around the country. There's a few cases that we want to walk you through today as an examples of what districts have done. Even though this, hi Jeff. Even though this may look like, oh, it's just technology, you just put that link out and people will start using it, we all know that's not the case. So Jennifer will talk today about the implementation, the things to consider. These type of approaches are not always right for every district, and there are things that is part of what we want to do today in the agenda is really thinking about if it's even right for you, and what are the questions that you should be asking as a district, as a school, as a state, as you going through, should I use online training? If I am, should I use, what type of modality should I use? Should I use virtual humans? What is that going to mean, and why should I do that? So a little bit about the agenda. We'll go quickly through social emotional learning. We'll do a little bit of a skill building role play to make you feel very uncomfortable. And we'll then do a few role plays with virtual humans to show you how that actually looks like. And we're a small group, so questions along the way, please feel free to interrupt if there are certain things that are interesting. And then we'll talk about, as I said, best practices, using some cases. I think you have a case in California even that we did. So that's a little bit about the agenda.
So we've been talking a lot about social emotional learning.
Should we pause for the two additional guests? We introduced ourselves. I don't know if you want to
Hi,
go
everybody.
quick.
My name is Janai. I am the CEO and founder of School Architects, which is a national education consulting firm, and I'm here as a doctoral student as part of organizational change program at USC. Great to be here.
Great.
So I'm the founder and CEO of Gaggle. We identify a lot of social emotional issues, and I'm trying to see how do we solve them.
All right. So this is the standard CASEL-defined definition of social emotional learning, the process of learning, practicing, and building competencies such as self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. You know, we're talking, I noticed Ron did a panel earlier today, and SEL is not invented this week or the last 3 years. I mean, the people at CASEL have been doing this work for 30 years, and they're a fantastic resource. But when we think about social emotional learning, I mean, you'll see these things will come up as we go through the simulations. And we hit on them in different ways, but experiential ways rather than telling you about it. And so I want you to sort of be looking out for that as we go. Next slide, please. And then this is a little more deep dive at what the SEL core competencies as defined by CASEL really look like. And somebody this morning made the comment that there's a need for a roadmap to really help districts figure out, you know, how do we integrate social emotional learning in our district? Because it means a lot of different things, right? And there's things you want to do with students, but there are also things you want to do with the adults, and you want to have the adults understand what is social emotional learning and how do I integrate it into my classroom work, but also how do I integrate it into my own behavior? Because of course, as much as we think kids are not following our models, they are. Even whether you're parents or teachers, they are absorbing everything.
Yeah, every time I look at this, I'm like, this is skills that adults needs to have, right? It's not like, oh, just the kids needs to be able to regulate their emotions.
Right.
So.
Right, exactly. We recently launched a bullying simulation for New York City public schools, and as I'm reading through the open-ended questions in the survey, somebody says, can't we have this for adult bullying? Because we see this in schools, and if we're bullying each other as adults, what are we communicating to kids? So let's look at the next thing, because what we really do is we think of the whole child and social emotional learning as kind of a part and a piece of all of these things that are what I like to think of as the substrate or the soil that kids are learning in. So I was telling Maureen this morning in the panel on SEL, the facilitator was talking about things that SEL was something beyond the academics. And immediately I'm thinking, no, it's something that's underneath the academics. It's what's going to make the academics actually work and the learning to take place. More and more what we know is as much technology as we throw at kids, the thing that helps them learn is relationships. Whether that's in the family or in the classroom, with each other, it's really all about relationships. And in this case, the way we look at it as Kognito is in nurturing the conversations that help build those relationships. Please join us. Would you like to introduce yourself? We're such a small group.
I do apologize, I can't stay for the whole session too, but I'm Melissa Oldred and I lead education programs at Unity Tech.
Okay.
We're the interactive engine behind a lot of ed tech, as well as games and simulations.
You will see some of your technology played out today. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. Well, I mean, I didn't know that, but I assumed that.
Okay.
Okay. I'm happy to hear that.
Okay, we could go off into a really wonky direction, but we won't. So these are the things that schools are thinking about. They're thinking about MTSS and PBIS. They're thinking about safety, right? We've seen districts like panicked about safety, and how much of that is the soft side of safety and how much are we investing in cameras and perimeter fencing. The social school resource officer is a whole other question. But trauma-informed practices, bullying, social, these are all part, for me, of the soup of, what kids are coming into every day. And we like to think of it as this like rich soil, and how can we enrich that soil so that we do have career readiness and better outcomes and graduation rates and all of the attendance and all those things that we're goaling ourselves on and hoping to achieve. So speaking of conversations, we thought we'd take you through a quick role play exercise. But in order to do this, we want to set it up with the high school. Can you run that?
I can run it from there.
Thank you. You need the CEO to run the technology. I don't know. Okay.
Should I go to the
No. Go to the menu, yeah.
All right.
Go to the menu and go to learn about Renee. So this is, you got to pay attention because we're going to set up an issue that we've seen with Renee, and then we're going to role play ourselves how we're going to handle this situation, this conversation with Renee. So start over, yeah.
Do you have sound there?
So Sean, do you have any students right now that you're concerned about?
Yeah. There's a senior named Renee. She's always been a little tense, but this year it's gotten worse. And a friend of hers told me she thinks Renee is cutting herself. So I've been trying to figure out how to talk to her about it.
This is a profile of Renee. Let's start with academics. It looks like Renee's grades and class participation are really good.
Oh yeah, she's a great student. Really cares about her grades, and I know she studies hard.
When you're ready to move on, hit the arrow to continue.
Okay.
Here are some behaviors Mr. Lyons has noticed or heard from others. Sean, take us through these.
Sure. Well, lately, every time she gets a B or sometimes even an A-, she gets really upset. Last week she got a B-, and I literally thought she was going to cry. And Miss Sandifer, who co-sponsors the yearbook with me, had a similar problem. Every time she'd assign Renee a story, Renee would text her all the time, asking her questions and needing feedback.
Did Ms. Sandifer ever talk to Renee about it?
No, I don't think so.
And tell us about the possible cutting.
Well, I haven't seen any cuts on Renee, but her friend Tasha has. She asked me not to mention it to Renee, but I think I should.
What about Renee's extracurricular life?
I've met her family a number of times, and they're all great. Her sister Reese was one of my favorite students when she was in school here. Friends seem normal, and Renee's involved in a ton of extracurricular activities here at the school.
Anything worrisome about Renee's appearance?
No, nothing too unusual.
Here are a few warning signs that a student may be at risk for psychological distress. Which of these did you notice in Renee's profile?
Anybody? What did you notice? Worrying, okay.
Excessive demands of teachers' time.
Excessive demands of teachers' time.
Self-harm.
I heard somebody say tearful, self-harm. Okay, let's see.
Here's what I noticed. She seems overly anxious about schoolwork and yearbook assignments. She almost cried after getting a B on an exam. And she texts Ms. Sandifer multiple times a day to ask for advice. And then there's a possibility she may be cutting. If true, this means her anxiety has reached an unhealthy level. Sean, when do you plan to talk to Renee?
I asked her to come by after school, before track practice.
Good. It's important you don't feel rushed and don't have other students around.
Okay, so what should be the goal of this conversation? Are you going to establish a relationship with Renee, refer her to the counselor, or do you need to take her to the counselor right away? Now, if you're in Maryland, you have different rules around this, so you don't get to answer. Or you can.
Because of cutting,
Okay. So let's say take her to the counselor. Okay, and it says it's okay to do this, and your school's policy may require it, and if you're in Maryland, it does require it. But normally, we wouldn't force a student to go to the counselor unless we believe the student may be in a life-threatening or life-changing situation. Be sure you know your school's policies about responding to cutting and other types of non-suicidal self-injury. And really, the research around non-suicidal self-injury is in a state of flux right now, which is why some districts have that. Some researchers, in fact, our expert on NSSI, feels that this is a coping mechanism, and even though it's a risk factor for suicide, it's more of a coping mechanism and something you don't want to stigmatize. So Maryland has particular legislation, which is actually what shaped some of this language. So over and over again.
Now it's time to begin your conversation with Renee. You'll be guiding Mr. Lyons, deciding what he should say and ask. You should tell her you're concerned and explain why, ask about her behaviors, and refer her to the counselor.
Okay, stop. Okay, we're going to stop there. And
So thanks again for coming in.
Oh, no.
Okay. So if you don't mind, we'll just split the room in half. If you 4 can work together and you 5 can work together, you're going to choose a Renee, you're going to choose a Mr. Lyons, and everybody else is going to be the coach. And you have to bring up what you've noticed, find out what's going on with Renee, and motivate her to see the counselor. Okay? I'm going to give you, we said this was a 7-minute exercise. So you have 7 minutes to get Renee to the counselor. Does this seem realistic, school people? Is this a realistic scenario? Okay.
Ideally.
Okay. So go. Okay, so you have to work faster because, as we all know, teachers don't have a lot of time, right? She's got to go to track practice. Let me see if somebody's trying to.
You know, but sometimes when we talk to people, they can help us see with more clarity how we can get things done in a way that feels productive and doesn't feel as stressful. And I think just having someone to talk to can help kind of alleviate some of the concerns that you have. Essentially, you don't think you should have too many concerns about where you're going in life. I see a really bright future for you. Do you think maybe I could take you down to Miss Williams' office and we could talk with her about how to help you manage all of these stressors that are going on right now for you?
Well, I guess you think it's best,
Yeah, let's go.
We're going to jump in there, Renee and counselor.
You get to know them.
I was a teacher. But I taught elementary school. Yeah, I work with high schools now that I don't work with students directly.
So Renee, how did you think it went, just being on the receiving end of it?
Take away the no, you know.
What did you think?
That was Renee took it easy on me. Really easy. Okay. I think I was balancing between like acknowledging that there are stressors and then talking about like workload and privilege. I don't know, I feel like I don't want to implant ideas that you should be stressed, and I was realizing as I was saying those things out loud, like I don't want to implant the idea that those are things that you validate and that you should be stressed, and more like these are things that everybody's dealing with, and how do we manage that so we're not stressed.
Okay, let's bring this back together because you guys have some great observations, and I'm sure you guys have some great observations. So how did it go? Did Renee go to the counselor? You're going.
I have to go.
Nice to meet you. Okay.
She was on the way.
She was on the way. Okay. Did she put up a fight?
Yes.
Why didn't she want to go to the counselor?
Well, a lot of things, but I think fear of parents' expectations, and that they would see that as a weakness.
Mm-hmm. Okay, coaches, how did they do?
They did really well.
Yeah?
You got the right resistance. You had like a real open approach to it, so I felt
You were the teacher and you were Renee?
I was Renee.
Oh, you were Renee. That's interesting. Both our gentlemen took on the Renee role. And how did it go for you guys?
Renee went to the counselor, so success.
Great. Yeah, I have to say it was, from what I was hearing, this was like, ooh, they're really good at this. This is like not what I wanted. How did you feel when we said, oh, we're going to now do a little role play? Did you go like?
awkward.
Awkward. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you ever had to do role play in professional development?
Yeah.
And is it awkward?
Always. But then once you do it, that's
Right.
why I wanted to be the counselor to just like get this done.
Yeah, let's
It'll be
go.
fine for me.
Get over it. Yeah. Okay. So what we know about face-to-face role play is, well, what we know about role play is it's the best way to change behavior, behavioral rehearsal. And that's what we're looking for when we're asking teachers to do something differently, right? But we also know there's that feeling, that anxiety, that social evaluative threat, as Dr. Albright would say, where we feel really uncomfortable. And when you feel really uncomfortable, your brain is not 100% optimally engaged in learning the things you want to learn. So, and medicine has a whole other aspect of this, which is the standardized patient, where they actually train actors to come in and be patients, and it's a very expensive way to evaluate the performance of doctors. So let's look at an example of doing this exercise with our virtual Renee and virtual Mr. Lyons and see how we feel about that experience.
No problem. I don't have anything to do till track practice starts. So, what did you want to talk about?
Okay, so you're taking on the role of Mr. Lyons, my Mr. Lyons is, and you're talking to Renee, and you have a lot of choices to make here. You can make small talk and just break the ice with her, or you can jump right in and express concern about, because you don't have any time, right? We knew that because we already lost somebody. So let's go to express concern, and you seem really nervous lately.
You seem really nervous lately.
No, I don't. I mean, what are you talking about?
Okay, so this is your virtual coach, and Jackie is the embodiment of, the school mental health professional, and she's here to guide you and give you some coaching on what would be the best thing. And here she says this is a broad criticism that's likely to make her defensive. A better approach is to gently express concerns about specific behaviors, like her reaction to making a B. Okay, so let's do that. And then you can go on and pursue this conversation and pick the next thing, even though you made a, kind of rookie error. Or you can go, and you can see that your choices are now changed. Sorry, Ron, you want to go back? So your choices are changed. You can discuss grades, you can discuss the yearbook, you can discuss cutting. Jackie just told you to be specific, right? So you can also, in this environment, undo your decision and try something different. So we know that was a mistake. We could pick something else. So just a simple example, express concern. Let's do that in a different way. Ron, thanks.
I've been concerned about you lately. You seem a little stressed.
Oh, I don't know, maybe. Why?
So now you have a different kind of response from Renee, right? She was defensive, and now she's a little more curious and a little more open and ready to respond. So you have feedback, positive feedback from Jackie. And now you can go on to make other choices. So who wants to make the next choice? Okay, discuss cutting. I'm worried you may be hurting yourself, or I hear you're cutting.
Let's do that.
I hear you're cutting.
Well, I hear you're cutting yourself.
What? Oh my gosh, what are you talking about?
It's okay, Renee. I just want to talk to you about it.
No, I don't want to talk about anything. I gotta go.
So this is an abrupt way to bring up such a sensitive topic. Undo that decision, and this time be more aware of how your statements might sound to her. So in this case, you cannot choose to go forward. This is a fatal error in the game logic of the simulation, and you must go back. You're going to have to ask her, but you can't ask her yet. So let's pick something else. Try to get a little further down the path. So one of the things you can't do in this environment is autoplay. This is not like, the training that we take in, compliance training. You press go, you do the dishes, you come back, you take the quiz. It's not that. So what are we gonna ask her?
Let's do discuss grades.
Okay, discuss grades. You asked a lot of questions about on the last exam, or you seem to freak out about getting a B. So you seem to freak out? Yeah. Okay.
Well, the other day when you made a B on that exam, you really seemed to freak out about it.
No, I didn't. What are you talking about?
Yeah, what are you talking about? Okay. She's less likely to deny. Okay, so you want to explain yourself? You were about to cry, or, you just seemed a little upset. Upset? Okay. Upset.
I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it. I guess you just seemed a little upset. I know you work really hard for your grades, so I wondered if maybe it stressed you out to get a B.
Oh, well, yeah. I get upset when I mess up like that. It wasn't a hard test or anything, I just spaced out. I guess I didn't study enough, you know? I don't know what my deal is. I tried to study.
Okay, now what? Can everybody read those? Yeah. Okay. Go down to discuss observations, Ron. Seems you're more stressed lately. Okay.
Well, you've always cared about your grades, but it seems like you're just more stressed lately.
Well, you know I really want to go to Stanford. My sister Reese is there, and that's where my dad went to school. And if I don't get in and get a scholarship, and then there's band and yearbook and track and everything. So.
Okay. Okay, we want reflect, Ron.
Sounds like an awful lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Follow up. Yep.
If you don't mind me asking, why do you need to get a scholarship?
Well, my parents are already paying for Reese to go to school, and she's got some scholarships, but it's still really expensive. So money's tight. It's going to be hard for them to pay for both of us to go there, and then my little brother has to go to school in a few years too. So they told me they don't know if they could send me to Stanford for 4 whole years if I don't get some really good scholarships. So I'm just trying to do everything I can.
Bottom one? Okay.
It sounds like you might need someone to talk to about everything that's going on, help you relieve some of this pressure that's building up.
What do you mean, like a therapist?
Well, I was just thinking it'd be nice for you to speak to Miss Caraway, the school counselor.
You want me to talk to her about what? About this?
Let me maybe just before we continue to give you a sense of what's happening behind the scene. So each scenario, right, is structured with a backstory and with certain goals of the skills that we want you to practice. And we map those out, and then we map also the ineffective ones that people normally do or do too often. And we build a storyline that will allow you to again and again get exposed to opportunities to make those effective decisions, but also choose these pitfalls, which are not identified the pitfalls, but they're there as options for you, so that you can continuously practice these effective and ineffective approaches again and again and again as a way for you to start understanding what is the right way to navigate a conversation with Renee. Right? So because we skipped some of the didactic before, those have not been as articulated to you as they would for a user. But that is kind of what's happening here. And the way Renee is going to respond to you is she starts with a certain emotional state. So depending on your approach, she may kind of shut down and not really reveal a lot. Or if you start using better or more effective tactics, she'll open up and reveal more information to you. So each one of us, depending on the path that we take, can have a completely different experience with Renee. We can end up in a different place. This is an example of one where you saw where kind of having the coach kind of try to sometimes push you back to a better place. So there's some forced undos in a way, and in some other cases they're just a suggestion. You may want to try this. It's done for 2 reasons. One is that a lot of the teachers don't necessarily have any experience or skill level. So they're starting from a fairly basic. Some of you may have more experience with it, but most teachers don't. So we really want to make sure that we guide them a little bit more in the learning. And the other reason is that we don't want to take a half a day because there's no need. So by giving you some guidance and kind of pushing you along, we're able to give you these 7-10 minute scenarios which is how long this takes. We have people who spend half an hour because they enjoy getting her upset, and that's fine. But that's how long it should take. And giving you multiple scenarios, Renee is 1 out of 3. So each time it's a bit of a different personality, different issue that you're dealing with. So you really gain that practice level. Because we found that it's not just the skill that people are missing, it's also the confidence to even have these type of conversations. So by practicing, you are gaining more confidence, not just more skill. So that's kind of the behind-the-scene engine, which is a Unity engine. Yes.
Yeah.
That is controlling kind of the responses of the characters. Yes.
You had a
Just
question?
curious, are you working with a lot of teacher education programs at universities and colleges?
A few.
Yes.
Yeah,
And how's that going so far?
They really like it. In fact, I was approached in a session this morning with somebody who's looking at teacher training and 5 years out, because they'd like to be able to see if you can really avoid losing teachers and teacher burnout. So yeah, I think that ideally that would be where all of this would take place, and maybe 10, 15 years from now, when teachers in the field all have these skills, you'll be mainly building them in teacher preparation. But right now, we're in a place where there hasn't been a lot of emphasis on that.
So when we started, this is one of the first programs we created. It's been updated graphically over the years, but the core content has been around for 6, 7 years. And a lot of the experts we work with talked about the fact that especially younger teachers will drop out after the first year or two because they don't feel like they can connect with the kids, especially if they're from a different background. So those programs that are coming to us are using it not just from mental health perspective or SEL, it's literally teacher skills, how to better connect with kids, how to better engage them in a conversation, et cetera, et cetera. So you could take the entire SEL out of this and just say this is just pure communication training for them.
Sorry, do you have diversity in terms of scenarios for demographics, cultural?
We have a diversity in terms of the appearance of the characters. We do not, besides we've done some work with veteran students in higher ed and LGBTQ students where we go a little bit more into those specific terms of topics, but from working with experts, at the end of the day, these motivational interviewing skills, these communication skills are really, to a degree, gender and race neutral. You should show empathy to people no matter who they are.
Right.
So we show diversity in appearances, but we don't say, oh, here is an Asian student or an international student, and therefore you should talk to them completely different. No, there are things you need to take into account when you talk to them. Jennifer can talk more about work we've done with Native Americans, where there's more things you need to be aware of instead of who they are and where they're coming from, but in terms of the way that you should talk to people.
And is that shared in that profile that we initially saw, if there's any?
No, so we haven't said, well, Renee is an African-American character, and, because she's African-American, blah, 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 blah. No, and to your point, though, so this simulation has been in the field for, about 8 years, and it's been deployed everywhere from rural Alaska to the Bronx. And one of the things about the characters and the use of animation is really that it has a certain kind of neutrality, and it generalizes really, really well across demographics. So we have looked at demographic differences, and what's interesting is for the teachers, for example, African-American teachers have higher initial self-efficacy than other groups, but they all kind of converge in the follow-up with the sustained changes in behavior and attitudes.
Yeah, the other thing that's been interesting, when we first started to design, we're like, okay, are you going to play a male or a female teacher? Based on talking to a lot of people, we said, well, it seems, we now have the data to be able to back it up, that female will be more comfortable playing the role of a teacher, but male teachers will be less comfortable playing a role of a female teacher. which is interesting in many different ways. We have simulations where you can pick who you want to play, but the reason there is because you're playing a nurse or a social worker. Like there's literally a different way that you're going to manage the conversation. So we may change the background and change the character. In this case, again, it doesn't really matter. But it's interesting to see kind of gender preferences in that sense. And so this is one where you play a male teacher. In that case, the characters change. If we go back to the menu, you're going to see that there are a few other students, different appearance, different backgrounds, different level of difficulty as well. We want to try to scaffold the learning here.
Well, and in
Sorry,
fact...
you had a question?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's a little off topic, so I'll
Oh.
what you're saying and then
I was going to say one of the pitfalls of this ethnicity question, for example, is in this set of simulations, there is a character named Rob, and he has a tattoo, and his original name was Roberto, and then we got feedback from the field that this was like stigmatizing Latinx students. So, we do try to keep them sort of ambiguous unless we're doing something that is culturally specific. And Ron mentioned we do a lot of work with Native Americans, and we did create a culturally specific program called Trauma-Informed Policing with Tribal Youth, in which case there's a didactic module about intergenerational and historical trauma, and you're explaining why Native American youth might be more likely to fight, flee, or freeze, fight, flee, or you know what I mean. So that has a kind of historical setting, ethnic.
It's amazing you can do that.
Yeah, but you have to design for that, and you have to design for it with the experts who are going to give you that cultural nuance.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And how do you measure, like, I don't know, I'm sure you've gotten like a ton of positive feedback, but is there a way that you measure like the efficacy of once they go through it? Are you measuring like teacher confidence, or are you measuring like post interactions? Do you have them fill out a survey? Like, how do you measure?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we measure, we have integrated surveys, so there's pre-post and follow-up, and most of our follow-up data is from 3 months out. And we ask them in the pre, how many students have you identified, approached, and referred in the past whatever period of time, 2 academic months. And then when we follow up with them at the 3-month follow-up, we ask them the same question. So we have the delta, and we have shown increases. And I was saying to Maureen, the biggest increases that we've seen have been in our elementary school program, which simulates a conversation with a parent, because that seems to be the real third rail anxiety-provoking conversation. But they all show, these programs, the at-risk, this is called at-risk for high school educators, and there's an elementary and a middle school version of this training, because we know that one of the things we're trying to do is make these conversations relevant to the grade level that we're working with. Otherwise, it would be less effective. So,
how does this actually culminate, this experience?
So it culminates.
I stopped you kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
But go
yeah. I mean, we don't have to play through it. It culminates by you countering all of Renee's objections to talking with Miss Caraway, because Renee is much more difficult than you in the role play. She's like, I don't think so. I don't really know her. I don't know why it would be, because Ms. Caraway, I mean, she's a high-performing student. She doesn't even know the school counselor, right? She has no relationship. So it culminates with Mr. Lyons, making an appointment for Renee and agreeing to go with her the next day and taking her to the school counselor.
Right.
So,
yeah. So
but it's a lot of countering objections.
Right. I mean, each scenario, this is where it gets, you can imagine that the people who are at the company working on these have the most fun. This is where it gets to thinking through what are the phases of the conversation. if you noticed, at the beginning you build some rapport, you then bring up your concern, you then have to deal with their hesitations, you then have to kind of do, please.
Yeah, sit down.
So yours.
Join us.
You then have to really motivate her to do that. So you're going through these steps, and each one is its own kind of mini step within the conversation. And sometimes we'll make it more difficult, less difficult. And so you're going through the entire kind of process here.
When you're all done, you want to review what you did. Is there a transcript, or is there something you can review?
Right. No, so depends. In this case, we have, because we can track everything that you're doing, we can do a lot of great assessment, but we can also give you very personalized feedback. And one of the big benefits of this versus in-person role play is the fact that we each have experience with the same virtual student. They can act as themselves better than any one of us can. And that you can take it again and again and again as you try to kind of improve on that. So at the end, you get feedback along the way, but at the end, I can do a little bit of a play-by-play, as if it's was a game, and I can say, hey, let me show you things that you have done well, things that you haven't done well. So each one of us, when we get to the end, based on the decisions we made, we'll get a personalized movie, which is really a lot of small parts that were pre-recorded, and then we're assembling the right one and saying, here is the things you did well, here are the things you didn't do well, and let's go through them. In other cases where we do things more with healthcare, we're actually going to give them like a score. Teachers like to give scores, don't like to get scores. So we don't do it here. But in other cases, we can literally score you on how well you have done. So you can imagine scenarios where you play a nurse and you're talking to a patient, that the hospital wants to actually know that you showed a certain level of competency. And so those are cases where we score people. Here, it's a little bit more soft in that sense, but it's very specific about how you have done.
Yeah, and the portfolio has evolved over time, so different programs in the portfolio have a little bit different way they handle feedback.
So why don't we move, we have about another 20, 30 minutes. Yeah. Why don't we move to the step of if this type of approach is relevant, like what are the things when we work with district, when we work with states, what we suggest for them to think about before they jump into this. Because on one hand, you can look at this, and you should to a degree, as online training, right? This is either to replace or to augment what you're doing in person. It is delivered on your phone or on a desktop, right? So everybody can access it. It is within a learning management system, so you know who goes in, you know if they finished, you know how well they have done. You can collect a lot of surveys. So a lot of the basic benefits of online training are relevant here. And then you have on top of that the fact that you're learning through practice and not through lecture, right? So which the reason why we started the company is to move people from awareness to action. And we can only do it if we actually give you the ability to build a skill, not just tell you you should be, you should show empathy and you should be nice to people. It's like, sure, I don't actually know what that means.
Right. And I think we should emphasize, we're doing this as a group, but this is not how this is intended to be deployed. It's intended to be an individual exercise. You sit with your earbuds or your headphones, you do you go through the program on your own. But let's talk, you want to talk a little bit about implementation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me which slide to go to.
Go to 14. So in the beginning, we were really naive, and we thought, this is, we invented this program, we lowered all the barriers to doing this kind of work, and we can just send out a link and everybody will take it. And they didn't. So we had to get really serious about our implementation science and the support that we provided to districts. And we created templates and documents to change the way you frame the activity, and how you debrief the activity. So we have a discussion guide that comes with each one of these simulations. We have a program for high school students, and that has two different, it has a discussion guide and a lesson plan, and a mental health lesson plan, and an SEL specific lesson plan, so that it can really plug and play for teachers if they're building it into curriculum. But we also realized that often our champions are special education or school counselors, and they need a lot of support. They might need support in adoption and gaining some buy-in from leadership, whether that's a principal or a superintendent. They need buy-in across a number of schools. So if you're a district student support director, you're going to need a plan for how you're going to communicate this. If you get the okay to do the adoption, how are we going to communicate this across our schools, and whose buy-in do we need? So we do a lot of coaching of districts in how to do this. And 2 weeks ago, we launched a statewide program in Florida. And for the first time, we have a really formalized implementation academy for the districts, so that we're training. They have a designated school safety specialist in each one of their 69 districts. So the school safety specialist becomes the expert in the Kognito universe and in the simulation content and the deployment strategies, so they can support the engagement at the school level. But then we're also running implementation sessions for the schools, because the rubber is going to meet the road at a site, at a school site. And so somebody has to own that. And ownership is a big deal, right? So, and how you present it is going to somehow influence how people feel about what they're doing. The other thing we realized is that once you train people, they have to know what's going to happen next. So who is the referral point of contact in your school? And that's part of what we coach people in the debrief discussions. You know, you need to make sure that you know in your school who that referral point is. You need to know what the process and procedure is if there is a different level of emergency. And so we created a place in the simulation menu for local resources, and districts can input their local resources there.
Yeah, just to add, I think it's been interesting to see over the years, because as Jennifer said, when we first put it out, we're like, it's a link, you know, just send it to people. It will take care of itself.
Problem solved.
And while we know that once you click on it, you see what it is, you stay engaged and learn from it, et cetera, getting you to actually open the door or click on that link is a difficult challenge no matter what's behind the door. And that's a general public health challenge. So we started to do a lot of work with the clients to help them plan it out and help them execute on it to whatever degree they need us. And it's been a learning experience for us, as it's been, I think, for a lot of our clients to understand what's the effort involved.
Right.
Sometimes it's pretty simple. You know, sometimes you'll have Fairfax County in Virginia as an example where you know, within a week they train, or 2 weeks they train like 90% of their teachers, because they had enough support from the top and they put the right communication out to people where like, okay, we need to take this, and it's very, very quickly it's all getting done. In some other cases, I think Florida can be a good example where we just started and it's an entire state, and it's going to take a lot of activities and probably more than a few weeks until they get to that level of adoption. On the flip side of it, my goal is not to scare clients when they look at this. It's just that you have to think through this. There's a lot of other people who have done it very well, so there's a lot of best practices. And sometimes a client has the capacity to do a lot of stuff. Sometimes they're like, I only got a grant and I'm one person and I can't do all of this. And so okay, who's taking the load of that work. But once you go through that plan, and I think your next slide is a good example of one place in California, it does work.
Yeah.
But
and you just have to figure out where does it fit, right?
Right, but it's more about, I think the point I'm trying to make is it's much more than just the technology. Technology can be very impressive and work very well, but it just doesn't mean anybody's going to open that door to actually experience it.
Do you usually sell it to a district or a school or like a per license type of thing?
We sell it to the district, and we have a scheme for district-wide pricing. What we're really after is sort of a public health approach. So our position is we would like you to train all adults in the school building when we're talking about PD. So we sell it. The pricing is based on a per teacher basis, but we make it available to everyone in the district. So that's just our philosophy of it. Yeah, so usually most districts have about as many non-teacher staff as they do teacher staff. So it's just a sort of shorthand for getting to everybody. Yeah. I mean, we also do sell in bundles of licenses, you know, if people have, oh, well, I only want to train, you know, this group. Yeah. But we really see it as part of the fabric and the safety net. And so we would encourage people to train everyone. So we, you know, develop the pricing to be advantageous in that way. Yeah, and it also has, there are economies of scale with larger deployments, so we pass those along to districts.
Do you want to show quickly maybe the example? And
yeah. Oh, do I have, I have the.
I think the next slide is,
yes. Well,
click on the.
Did I do this
yeah.
wrong? Okay, so this is a quick example, and it's usually some kind of a cascade of implementation. In this case, we're working with 7 districts in Santa Clara County and the Santa Clara Unified School District. They really looked at, they were able to participate in doing this as part of a collaborative, and they got buy-in from their leadership, but then they needed to get buy-in from the curriculum and instruction folks because they're really the thought leaders in the district for PD. So they, you know, provided links so that people could go through it themselves. One of our, actually in Howard County, Maureen, do you know Cindy Schulmeyer? So Cindy said, I just take it around and I show people, and then they get bought in because it's so cool. And then in the case of California, this is compliance training for their suicide prevention requirements. So, you know, they have free options for suicide prevention, but they're not necessarily evidence-based or effective. So they chose this for their compliance. And as Kathy Merrick, who's the client in this case, said, this wasn't a hard sell, you know, for the administrators. And she did planning. She has 30 schools, and she did planning across her secondary schools in the fall to get all of the sites. She has wellness coordinators in each of her schools to educate the wellness coordinators about what this was and why we're doing it and what she expected them to do at their school sites. And then they were ready to launch the first day back from winter break. And it was really like, okay, we're back, and you guys all go and take this training. And they did create, you know, the first 500 accounts in day one. They had a period of time that they needed to complete the training, and most people completed it in the same day. But you know, you can see from her impact report, teachers reported using the skills learned the next day. They made 4 referrals and 2 hospitalizations. And that's not to raise alarms, but those kids are out there. They're out there, and these are not hard skills to adopt. So she says we would have discovered the level of we would not have discovered the level of distress had we not been equipped to have those conversations. And we hear this a lot. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time now, and you know, we want teachers to be the eyes and ears of mental health and stress and struggle. But we have to give them really the skills and confidence to do that. And because they know that they're seeing kids every day who need more support than they can give them. And we're really careful not to say, you're taking on the role of the mental health professional. We honor the fact that you're the teacher, the cafeteria worker, the bus driver, and we want you to use your eyes and ears and leverage your relationship with the student to put them in the hands of somebody who's really better equipped to help. And then, you know, their secondary schools were the sort of first wave, and this was true in Fairfax as well. And then by word of mouth, the elementary schools just started requesting working on the program. So now they've trained about half their elementary schools, and they'll do the other half in the back to school period. But in this whole 7 district collaborative, over and over again, that cohort is telling the next cohort, this was really easy. This wasn't, and what's really, I think the best part is we're taking the burden of the training off of these people, and we're freeing them up to do the things that are around the training, like, why are we doing this? And let's pay attention to the referral process, and let's make sure that everybody is really aware of how we do this here in our school. Because you don't need to do the repeatable process over and over again, and because the simulation does that really, really well. So, yeah.
How long does the training take?
This particular one with Renee takes about an hour. You know, there's a lot of variability because you can go back and forth, as you saw, but it averages about an hour.
But with all of the scenarios that you all have?
Oh, well, so
I mean, in each simulation is structured as a 45 to 60 minute experience. If you are, you know, if you take this one, which is more around mental health, if you take one that's around supporting LGBTQ students, then that's another half an hour. So it started adding. Depending on the client, sometimes they like to, you know, take everything and do it as one kind of bundle. Sometimes they want to provide things over time, which helps kind of just the repeated practice, right? We all learn better. Practice over time is better than one practice.
Oh, I have the thing. I forgot I have the power. So there are a number of different things in the portfolio. So you might start out by doing elementary school, or you know, the elementary, middle, and high school, and then follow that up in curriculum with the one for students, because you don't want to train students before you train the adults, right? You might decide that your district has a lot of issues with LGBTQ bullying or attitudes that are affecting LGBTQ kids. So that might be a priority that you put in place, or trauma. You know, so we have different districts that sequence these things differently and based on their conditions in their schools. You know, some districts have more military kids in the district, and that's a real interest that they have. So it just really depends. But yeah, they all take between really 30 and 60, and the one for students is 25.
So we have another 10, 15 minutes.
You want to let them work through their...
No, I don't have suggestions. I'm just checking on time. There's any specific questions that anyone has? I know joined slightly later, so I don't know if you know what we're talking about. But yes.
So the scenario ends up being one-on-one for Renee and Mr. Lyons.
Right.
Are they all scenarios that end up one-on-one? You play one person there, or one student there?
No, you have classroom interactions. For example, if you see on the lower right, the bullying, that's a classroom management scenario. So you have a student who is harassed. The girl behind him harasses him about his reading skills and says really negative things about his immigration status. And then the girl on the right is sort of an upstander. And so there's how do I manage this situation in the classroom? Same thing, right. And same thing with Step and Speak Up. That has a classroom management aspect as well. So yeah, yeah. So we do have a few more minutes. We have a worksheet if you want to take a quick.
I'll give you a copy of that if you want. It's,
yeah.
It's a little bit about things to consider if you want to adopt. Again, it's not about adopting Kognito. It's about adopting interactive learning as a way to address that. I don't know if Jennifer, if you can maybe walk us through these different pages.
Yeah.
I'll give you guys a copy.
Oh, and they're actually in here. So obviously, the first thing you want to think about is, like, where are your priorities? You know, because different things are going to rise up at different times, and every district is different. So a lot of times, people do come to us with a, you know, in extremis situation. We're working with New York City. They have a real issue with bullying. The city council is up in arms. But you know, if you're a district where you've had a bunch of suicides, you might be looking for suicide postvention or suicide prevention. It just really depends. And so, you know, the first step is like, what are we really trying to achieve here? What's the most urgent thing? And the second worksheet, which is on the back of the first worksheet, is, you know, how far along the pathway are you? And what we find is, in order for this to really be effective, you don't have to be on the left side of the rubric in the highly developed, you know, and even for districts that have a highly developed culture around these topics, adding some practice can be helpful. If you're just starting and you don't have your referral systems in place, you don't have, this is not a really good, like, first step, I would say. You want to have some of that infrastructure in place. So it's thinking about, you know, that for each of those areas. And then what about communication skills for the staff? You know, am I hearing, even walking the halls of a school, am I hearing teachers talk to students in a particular way? One of the first areas that we worked in was New York City, and I talked to a principal who specifically adopted the use of these tools because she was hearing complaints from parents about how her teachers were talking to students. So, you know, what is happening in the school building, in the site, with regard to communication? And then the last thing is really, it's sort of a readiness structure. You know, is there a need? Is there some policy infrastructure in place? Is there somebody at the district and building level who would be the owner of this project? Not that it's, you know, like I said, we're trying to reduce the barriers and the time, but somebody still has to own it. And then what about stakeholder engagement? So are you going to have support from your district? And are you going to have support from your school leaders to do this? And so it's a little bit about thinking through that and the you know, jigsaw puzzle of who are the stakeholders and who do I need to get on board to make this happen? And then making it happen, as you know, Santa Clara County found, it's really pretty easy. It's really easy. And it's, you know, it's obviously, it's an approach that has like a high return on the time invested. And we know time is worth a lot of money to districts. You know, we are working with a lot of districts who are doing mental health training in a face-to-face format that might take 6 or 8 hours. It's really hard to get that time from teachers, and it's really hard to plan those face-to-face events. So that can be really time-consuming, and that can be a barrier to getting the work done. I think those are just some things to think about.
Sorry if you guys went over this,
Yeah.
how does the assessment component work?
So we do pre, post, and follow-up surveys, and those surveys are integrated and tracked by individual users. So we're looking at individual behavior change across time.
But it's in survey form, not
It's
in the experience.
Not in the experience. But what the experience does is it exposes you to a certain number of decisions, correct decisions that you have to make in order just to get to the end. So on that basis, these have been approved for continuing medical and nursing education credits because you're trying to build these patterns.
Yeah, so the assessment depends what we talk about. If you say assessment of the person who's going through this, we know that for you to get to the end of the simulation, you have shown a certain level of competency. You have applied certain skills that we are targeting at a certain level. Right, so we know that by completing the simulation, you got to a certain level of competency that you demonstrated. Then to know whether the simulation works in real life, we do two things. One is what Jennifer mentioned. We create a baseline of your current behavior and your current skill level. And we measure that after the simulations and over time. So if one of the goals here is to increase the number of students that you approach and talk about a referral, well, I can ask you, how many students you approach in the last couple of weeks, and I can do this again 3 and 6 and 9 months from now and see whether I've been able to change that compared to a control group. The last one, which we're working on a few districts right now, is to be able to actually look at their data on the number of students who are actually getting help or are coming to get help. Which is data that they have, we don't. So we have collaborations with them so we can get that data back and compare between districts or schools within a district that adopted with a sufficient number of people versus those who did not, and see whether we have been able to move up the number of students that get connected to help, right? Which is one of the measures. It's not the only measure. We're trying to change climate. We want to build connectiveness. There's a lot of other measures that you can look at. But that's clearly one of them. So it depends on your definition of assessment, but we're coming at it from all different angles because, again, we don't assess the success of this by completion. We know that usage is important. You don't want to pay a lot of money and then end up with nobody using. So it's clearly a measure of success, but it's not a measure of impact. I think we're out of time, honestly.
I think we are. Well, thank
Great.
you
Thank
all
you
for
coming.
For coming.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.